Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the official Vox Podcast. Today we are on episode 3. In case you missed it, I'll drop the links in our description. Week 1 was with Richard Frost. Week 2 was with Craig Freer. And week 3 is my favorite guest. They say nobody forgets your first, and Barry was my first podcast guest. So, welcome back, Barry Kemp. Thanks for joining us once again, and good to have you here.
Sahel, thanks for inviting me again. Always great to talk about all things cloud and other interesting topics. Let's go.
Always a pleasure. I timed this one specifically because last time we had one of these sessions, your football team was doing a lot better than mine. And although I promised myself I'm not going to mention it, I just had to drop it in there and casually mention that the tables have kind of turned. But
I think we need to tell the world that you support Manchester United, and I support Liverpool, which, last time we spoke, we were way higher than you were. This time we are way lower than you are. So, not the best of times for our teams, for my team anyway.
I suppose normal service did have to resume at some point, right? Anyway, I'm glad to have you back here. And as always, I know it's going to be a good episode to talk about cloud. Needless to say, you know a lot more about it than me. So I'm going to let you take the lead. It's Cybersecurity Month, but since the last time we spoke, a lot has happened in the cloud space, and specifically within the Vox and something new on the horizon called Nymbis. Can you just tell us a bit about what's been going on since we last chatted?
Yeah, so what we took a decision a couple of months ago to spin out what used to be called Vox Cloud into its own division, its own entity, and we did that for a couple of different reasons. Partly because with Vox is very well known as a fiber and a voice provider, not so much as a cloud provider. And by pulling out into our own entity, we get the ability to market ourselves as a cloud specialist service provider, which is exactly what we are. We provide cloud solutions to customers in a variety of different spaces. But that's specifically what we do. We don't do fiber, for example. We don't do voice. We just concentrate on cloud and what cloud does for a customer. And then the whole point is that we want to help customers solve problems by using cloud technologies. That's the reason why we exist.
So take us through some of the services you guys offer and what exactly you do for the customers at Nymbis.
So we have a variety of cloud services. Our probably a premium product that we sell premium product is what we call the Nymbis Cloud, which is a virtual private cloud solution. A VDC stands for virtual data center. Effectively, what it is exactly what a customer would have on site in a data center, except it's now virtual. So it's in a cloud location. Customer doesn't have to worry about things like power and cooling and hardware and any of those sort of things, and they get to consume this on a consumption basis. Very similar to what you would get on Azure or AWS, which we sell as well as part of our stack. But there are a couple of benefits. The major benefits in the South African context are it's RAND-based pricing, which the hyperscalers aren't. So the cost structure stays very sort of flat rather than going up and down with the exchange rate. The other solution we sell is backup. That's obviously a very key component, especially at the moment now with Cybersecurity Month, because everybody goes, okay, well, I've got the best security in the world. I've got firewalls and I've got a SIEM and I've got all the stuff I need for security. But when somebody does get through, you need to make sure you've got your data somewhere safe that the attacker can't get to. And that's where the backup becomes very important. So we have the ability to store a backup off-site, which is obviously quite important from a physical security perspective and things like fires and that sort of thing. But also that there's a layer between what the hacker potentially can get to and where the data is stored. So if somebody does get into a customer's environment, we can still recover the backups very easily without it too much. Hopefully without too much downtime. And then the other one that I wanted to touch on, well, there's two more that I wanted to touch on. One is co-location. So we partner with Terrico, which is our one of the bigger data center providers in the country, to provide co-location services. So that's when a customer has their own hardware and they want to go and put it somewhere safe. And Terrico is probably as safe as you're going to get in South Africa. Very high uptime, 5 nines SLA on the uptime, on the power and the cooling. And that gives the customer comfort that their data is in a very secure location, but it's still the customer servers. And that's the major difference between the VDC and co-location. And then the last one that I want to talk about, which is also quite interesting, and it also forms part of the assessment program that we're busy with at the moment, is unstructured data archiving. Some people have said to me, we mustn't call it archiving, we should rather call it offsite storage, which is what it is. But the whole idea is to take unused data the customer has on site, and normally that's file server data. So it's your Excel spreadsheets and your Word documents and PDFs and that sort of thing that hasn't been accessed in a period of time. So you can set that in the software. So let's say you've set it to 6 months. So any file that's older than 6 months automatically gets pushed into the cloud, into secure cloud storage, redundant secure cloud storage. And then it obviously saves space on the end user side, potentially saves money because the customer doesn't have to upgrade their hardware anymore, and makes their backups faster because you only have to back up the stuff that's on site rather than all of those 10 terabytes, for example, that the customer would normally have. So those are the major product sets.
Interesting, because I was going to ask you about that, because I've read a lot about archiving and written a lot about archiving, and it's been something that I've definitely seen on the Nymbis front. But I couldn't exactly identify the key difference between backup and archiving. Now that you've explained it that way, I think I get the picture a bit better. Something that I didn't hear you touch on, though, is cloud readiness. I know that it falls part of the assessments portfolio that you guys offer. Could you just talk us through that for a bit?
So before a customer goes into a cloud, any cloud, whether it's AWS, Azure, our own cloud, Huawei cloud, Oracle cloud, there's so many clouds nowadays, it's getting almost ridiculous. You need to understand what you have first. That's the first step of any sort of decision to go into the cloud or a move into the cloud. So in order to be ready for the cloud, you need to know what you have on site. And that's where an assessment comes in to start with. So we have a bunch of different tools that we use depending on the customer's requirements and what their network looks like. We scan through the network, we identify servers, networking, firewalls, those sort of things that need to move into the cloud. And then we can use that information to design a cloud solution for a customer. And we can say to a customer, okay, you've got this server for whatever reason, maybe can't go into the cloud. Maybe it's a server that runs a machine in their manufacturing plant. That's not really a cloud-focused machine. That will stay on site. But anything else, maybe a Sage ERP system, can move into the cloud easily, and we can obviously use that as a plan to move it into the cloud. So that's what we mean by cloud readiness. And assessments form a vital part of that process to understand where it's going to go, what's going to go, and how to make it go into the cloud.
So it sounds like that's point A for any business looking to successfully migrate to the cloud. Would you say that it's essential towards the process, or can it be done without it?
It can be done without it, but there's a lot more risk involved if without it. And it's just about if you don't plan the migration properly, especially in a larger environment, you may end up moving a server into the cloud before the database that server uses has gone to the cloud as well. And that's obviously going to stop the application working completely. And that's why these assessments are so important, is because they will then identify dependencies between different servers to say, okay, this is your ERP system. It has a database attached to it. You need to move both the database and the ERP system at the same time. Otherwise, you're going to break the system. So it is possible in small environments to do it without assessment, but 100%, once it starts getting to mid-size, probably more than like 2 or 3 servers, you should be doing an assessment first, just to understand. But the other side of it from an assessment perspective is it allows the costing to be done correctly for the cloud, because you can't like for like a cloud solution into the cloud. A on-site solution into the cloud, unless you understand what the usage is like on the on-site server. And that's where these cloud assessments come in handy, is because they can actually measure what that server, how busy that server is. And then when you move into the cloud, you can say, well, the server that I'm trying to migrate is only 5% busy on site. So therefore, I can actually take a smaller size VM going into the cloud, potentially saving money again.
Of course, the best part is it's completely free of charge.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Most of the assessments that we do as Vox, particularly on the cloud side, we do have a paid for cloud assessment, but our default standard one for most customers is a free assessment. It doesn't cost the customer anything. It's just, and in some cases, it gives customers insight into the network that they didn't actually have before. The example I often use is the HR server is a desktop under somebody's desk, and nobody really knows about it until we actually do an assessment and find it and go, excuse me, did you know that you actually had this other server under a desk somewhere?
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a win-win for everyone, basically.
Yeah.
My question, Barry, is for those still on the fence with regards to whether they should cloud migrate or not, why would you recommend it? What are the advantages, especially considering we're in the middle of cybersecurity month in terms of safety, in terms of practicality, and efficiency?
Okay, so let me start with a security discussion, because a lot of people traditionally in IT have been scared of the cloud because of the perceived insecurity of the cloud.
Yes.
And perceived is a very important word in this equation. To think of it in those terms is completely the other way around, because somebody like a Microsoft, a AWS, a VMware in our case, a Fortinet, for example, they have a lot more money to throw at security than a company by itself. So if you're trying to run a compute environment for a company on site, you maybe have the firewall from your provider, from your vendor, maybe you've put your own firewall in, you've got the security that you've built around it, but you don't have that extra sort of manpower to constantly monitor all the different security parameters that big cloud providers have. So just the economies of scale, and I think when I last read it, Microsoft spends $3 billion on security in their cloud environments. No business can afford to spend $3 billion on cloud. So just from that perspective, it's a lot more secure to go into the cloud. From an efficiency point of view, because of the way the clouds are built and the way that they can generally scale up and scale down, means that a customer that has to buy a specific size server on site can get a much smaller server in the cloud and then just change the size based on their need. So for example, month end, maybe you need more resources. With a cloud environment, any cloud, all the major clouds do this, you can scale up, add more resources to your server for your month end. And when month end's finished, you just scale it back down again and you carry on. So from that perspective, it's much more efficient. And then just from the South African context, we've gone through the longest period of load shedding in our history. And for a business running equipment on site, that means generators, power, UPSs, putting diesel in the generator, servicing the generator. It's all things that aren't core to most businesses' day-to-day running. So why not put it somewhere where you don't have to worry about diesel, UPSs, generators, all of those sort of things, and have the same experience, but just in a much more secure environment without having those other headaches.
The only selling point you needed to make there was the alternative is relying on ESCOM. And I think you would have sold most of us.
Yeah. At the moment, it's a massive challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah,
but it's exactly what the cloud is about: is doing away with those headaches.
Yeah. Could you talk a bit about the different cloud service models?
Okay, so there's three major ones and there are a couple of subsets of those three major ones, but there's three major cloud service models. I'm going to start with the base level, which is infrastructure as a service, or IaaS. That is the most basic version of the cloud service model, and in that use case, the provider looks after power, cooling, connectivity generally, and the customer puts their equipment on their services on top. So the most basic example is the VDC, like our virtual data center, or co-location. Those are both good examples of an IaaS service. It takes away a lot of the headache for a customer, but they still run their operating systems, their applications, all their data on top of that. Next up is platform as a service. And in that scenario, some of the building blocks of the application then get taken over from the provider. Provider still looks after power, cooling, all that sort of thing, but then they look after another layer, which is things like the SQL Server, the remote desktop services, some of those other services at a platform level. So the provider looks after the maintenance of those things. The very good use case there is Azure SQL as a service, which is Azure's database service, where Microsoft looks after that application. The customer then puts on top of that their Sage ERP or their Pastel or any of those services on top. And that's PaaS, platform as a service. And then lastly is the one that almost everybody uses on a daily basis. That's software as a service, and that is your Office 365. So, or Salesforce is the other one. But in that use case, everything up to where the consumer actually consumes the service is managed by the provider. So all the levels, the power, the cooling, all of that sort of thing gets run by the provider, and the customer just consumes it as a service. Like I said, Office 365 is one of the best use cases or examples of that service, because effectively you just log into your web interface or go into Outlook and you just use that service without having to worry about the back end that runs it.
Every time we speak, I'm amazed at how intricate and complex the cloud is. I mean, it sounds like at surface level, just this imaginary thing where our data is stored. But there's so much of complexity and so much depth to it that I don't think customers actually understand the full scope or full potential of cloud capabilities. Where do you see the future of cloud going, particularly with regards to this?
So one of the more interesting things with the cloud at the moment is the concept of containers. That's the next frontier almost. And now container, what a container is, it's like a virtual machine, except it's almost a subset of that virtual machine. And they can run on different platforms. They can run across different platforms. They are a lot more, in some ways they're more complicated, but they also simplify things. So they use the shared, effectively just the software application or program runs on its own in a little, call it box. And that's probably one of the more interesting applications that's going to be coming out. Sort of, I wouldn't call it mainstream quite yet. Everybody talks about it, but not everybody uses it yet. But I think in the next year or two, it's going to be very, very mainstream, and add to the sort of cloud use case even more.
And what's on the horizon in terms of Nymbis?
So from our perspective, containers is a big one. We're hoping to have that done early next year. We have a couple of interesting extra backup offerings. We are a Veeam partner, and we have backup offerings through Veeam that we're busy looking at. Veeam is busy building out their backup service, so you can pretty much get a Veeam backup product for almost any cloud service. So we can do Azure, we can do AWS, we can do Salesforce, we can do Office 365. And Office 365 is an interesting one because people go, why would you need to back up your Office 365? And there's a very good use case for backing up 365 because Microsoft, your responsibility as the consumer of the service is the data. Microsoft's responsibility is to keep the service up. So for anybody that's in any sort of regulated industry where you have to keep data for 3 to 5 years, maybe even 10 years in some cases, having a backup like that for your 365 is very important because you don't know that somebody's going to go delete a mail that they need, that you're going to need in 5 years' time for whatever reason. So that's a very important sort of use case for that.
Lastly, before we wrap it up, in light of everything that's going on with cybersecurity month, with everything we've spoken about and assessments, any words of advice or any parting nuggets for our listeners at home or anything you'd like to leave us on?
If you're going on a cloud journey, make sure you do the correct assessment first. It's vital to understand what the current state of play is on the network or in the environment before making a big step into a cloud platform. And then also the other thing that I feel quite strongly about is when cloud first became mainstream, it was this case of I'm going to choose the cloud I go to. So I'm going to choose Azure, I'm going to choose AWS, I'm going to choose VDC. But I think those days are past. It's now a world where we go, it's not this cloud or that cloud, it's this cloud and that cloud. So for me, multi-cloud is where the excitement is. Using the best services from the clouds that are available to work for whatever your business needs to do. That is going to be vital.
Interesting. And always golden nuggets from you. They should actually hire you at Enfield. Maybe you can give them a bit of guidance.
No, I think I'm much better talking about the cloud than coaching a football team.
I mean, we can always dream. There's still that part of me that hopes we'll get there one day. My team certainly needs it. Anyway, Barry, thank you. And as always, it's a pleasure. And hopefully we'll chat soon when you have some more awesome offerings on the line. It's it's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks for being on the podcast. Until next time, we'll chat then. And for all our listeners at home, we'll get you next week where we speak to none other than Heath Huxtable of Braintree with regards to his assessment offerings. Until then, take care and stay cyber safe.